Hello everyone, welcome to the Patriot News Network. Today I wanted to talk about the atrocious, disgusting Jeff Sessions hearing in Congress and essentially his statement that there's not enough basis for a special counsel. This is unbelievable. This is beyond the pale. It's shocking. Senator Jordan basically said, look, we wrote you 6 months ago. 20 of us wrote you 3 months ago. And we laid out the case of corrupt horror after horror after horror. And Sessions said, well, we have some investigation going on. My question is, okay, in 3 months, what did you need to investigate? All this has already been investigated. And if you look, they already have documented evidence of the money laundering and the bogus accounts and transfers at the Clinton Foundation. They have the strong case for the pay-to-play. The thing is, everything's already been investigated. Everything's already come out to the initial stage. It's not like, oh, we have a suspicion and we don't know a darn thing. Let's go see what we can find out. No, that's not it at all. That's horrible. The truth is that we're deep in the details of this. And there are so many horrific things going on that need investigating. They don't need investigation, they need prosecution. So you have the Uranium One pay to play, where Hillary got 145 $1 million. You have the Bill Clinton running around meeting with Putin and uranium advisors. You have the fact that Rod Rosenstein and Comey and Clinton and Obama all approved the Iranian One deal. You have the fact that Mueller did not notify the other members of CISFUS that there had been a bribery and corruption investigation. I think they would have changed their votes. Or worse, they already knew it and voted for it anyways, which is horrific. You have the Susan Rice unmasking. You have the Fusion GPS false dossier prepared. You have the FBI payments to Christopher Steele. It's hard to even list all the things that are corrupt and horrible. You can't even remember them all. There are so many. I mean, you can. What about an investigation of Benghazi and the murder of Ambassador Stevens to allow a huge ship full of weapons that were leftovers from the Iraq War go to the terrorists? And that included Stinger missiles and anti-tank weapons. What about that? What about the Fast and Furious investigation? Where's that? What about the IRS refusing to grant nonprofit status to right-wing groups? Where's that investigation? What about IRS harassment of right-wing groups? Where's that investigation? Where is the investigation of the specific spying on the Trump campaign using all of our national intelligence assets? Where's that investigation? And I think based on the answers that Sessions gave, I think his letter was just a cheap way to try to stay at his position. I think what's happening is Trump is not wanting to take pressure away from the tax reform, which I'll talk about in a minute. And so Sessions gets to live to the end of the year. I mean, live as his position, to keep his position. And after that, he's gone. If he does not announce indictments or a special counsel by the end of December, he's gone. He's just gone. Because they will have had to succeeded or failed in passing the tax reform, and then there's nothing holding Trump back. Trump should appoint Giuliani, who is a dogged, fierce prosecutor, as well as being mayor of New York. He is a fierce prosecutor to be acting attorney general. And one of the first things that Giuliani should do is to order Rosenstein suspended until the results of the investigation are over. And the next thing that should happen is that Mueller should be given 30 days to present to Congress to tell everything he found about Russian collusion, not about tax deals and filings 10 years ago. No. Every bit of evidence of Russian collusion that he found, he should present it to Congress, and Congress should vote, or the investigation Justice Committee of Congress should vote to continue or stop his investigation. And I think obviously they'll vote to stop it and say, thank you very much, Mr. Mueller, Mr. Corrupt, and thanks for nothing. And I think also that the American people should then get the bill for his nothing mandering, which is going to be, God knows, 40, 50, $100 million. How much have we wasted chasing a ghost? And the other thing is, how was a special counsel announced and set in motion without any evidence whatsoever? The only evidence was essentially Clapper, Brenham, and was it Comey, all declaring that the DNC had been hacked by Russians. And this is the 17 agencies proof, but it isn't 17 agencies. And then we know from the WikiLeaks drop that there were specific programs that used Cyrillic character keyboards and other little stupid things to make it look like you were hacked by Russians, when really it isn't. And the other question is, without actually being given the servers and access to the routers and the router logs, how could anyone know that hacking actually occurred? In the way, like, they mean hacking over an internet line. Well, if you don't have access to the physical computing infrastructure, there's no way you can tell. So that's preposterous. That's ridiculous. That's insane. That's nutty. And so basically this Mueller special counsel was appointed on a house of cards and lies that is a sham, that is quite easy to expose as a sham. In the meantime, you have about 40 separate charges against all members of the Obama crime family. And Sessions won't appoint a special counsel. Now, there is an argument, and this is the Judge Napolitano argument, that, well, special counsels are too independent, they run off, and they're hard to control and dangerous, and they shouldn't be used unless there's a conflict. Well, there is a conflict because the entire Justice Department, the entire FBI, the entire national security infrastructure is all corrupt. So if they're all utterly corrupt, then there is an argument to use a special counsel. There is an argument that this cannot be done through normal channels because the pressures of the corruption is too big. Now, why is Sessions not a candidate for leading this investigation? Why is Sessions terrified? I think he's terrified. Look, he's an old man. He's done his time. He's just about to retire. He doesn't want to come up against, Donna Clinton, the mob leader, the mob boss. You've got the retired mob boss, Bill Clinton, who still wields enormous power, but Hillary is the mob boss. She's the mob boss of America, of the American mob. And she can order a hit. And she has ordered hits. And, I think Seth Rich was a way of saying, all of you get in line, or look what happens. We did Vince Foster, we did Seth Rich. We aren't scared to do it. And none of you can come against us. So, in case you don't know, Seth Rich is likely the person who took the email files from the DNC server, probably on a flash drive, and made contact with WikiLeaks and handed them over. And then the next day he was shot in the back, like 4 times, which they called a robbery, even though no money was stolen. So that was a message. Don't mess with the mama. Don't mess with Mama Clinton, because you're going home in a box. So he's scared. He's scared. He knows he's dealing with the killers, and he doesn't have the guts. He's a little, he's a pussy. He doesn't have the guts. So what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? And the problem is, this is where Trump is struggling, because he has nobody on his side. He's got enemies all around. And he has to get certain political things done or managed, and they all hinge on other things. So he cannot take to task Sessions until the tax bill gets done. Similarly, he cannot take to task China on trade until the North Korea problem is resolved, either with a glass parking lot or them coming to the table and letting inspectors in and disarming. So in both of these cases, Trump is stuck. He cannot move forward. He cannot move backward. He just has to wait. These things will all be resolved by the end of the year, and then we're going to go forward. We're going to go forward. My prediction is with axing Sessions, which I predicted a year ago, that he just has to go. And I think Congress is going to get fed up. I think the Judicial Committee of Congress is going to get fed up. And the pressure on Clinton, on Trump to get rid of Sessions is going to be enormous. So that's what's happening there. And I think the response to Jordan is just unbelievable. Here is their encounter. I'm sorry, that clip didn't run. Anyways, I want to now switch and talk about the tax reform, because the tax reform is a giant swindle, and it's a complete sheep. I heard in the analysis that they have an authorization to increase the deficit by 1.5 trillion over 10 years. And so that is the amount they have to work with, and 900 billion of that is going to go to the corporate rate tax cuts, which is targeted from 35 to 20%. Now here's the thing. Most people run a corporation so that it is tax neutral, meaning you keep your expenses high enough to eat up any profit. Most. It's only when you get so profitable that you can't squirrel away any more money in research or costs that you end up actually paying taxes. So these tax cuts are a bit, they're going to be helpful for business, but remember, Amazon ran for over a decade without paying any tax. GE doesn't pay any taxes at all. I think a lot of our oil companies don't pay anything in taxes because of all the breaks they get. What's happening with the tax bill is that the larger deduction for married couples in the $60,000 to $160,000 range is going to be a small help for married couples, but not for single people. And if you're single and you're in the $100,000 to $160,000 earnings range, your taxes are going to go up because that increased deduction is not sufficient to offset the fact that you're actually going into a higher tax rate for a lot of your earnings than before because they've reduced the number of brackets. So this is actually the sweet spot for the middle class taxpayer. These are the middle class people who pay the most taxes. And even though most of the taxes are paid by the top 10%, this is sort of the gouging of the middle class again. And this is ridiculous. We gave $23 trillion to the bankers. And we're still going to gouge the middle class. The middle class is dying. The economy is dying. We've been in a Great Depression now for 17 years with only 1/4 of possible growth. Go to shadowstats.com and look it up. So we are in a depression that eclipses the Great Depression by about a factor of 5. If you research the Great Depression, you'll see they had a couple down years, a couple up years, a couple down years, a couple up years. It was all over in 10 years. The war brought us out of it, as they say. We switched to a war economy. People worry that's what's going to happen now. And what is the war? The war is the war against North Korea. And it's going to be a nuclear war, which is frightening because we've never had a nuclear war before. It's also frightening because while North Korea can't reach America, they can very well reach Japan. Japan is the only country on Earth that's actually been ravaged by nuclear weapons. And the thought that they might get hit again is just beyond belief in terms of the suffering. Tokyo has, 14 million people? It's unbelievable what might happen. So we have a tax plan that is basically the indictment of Mitch McConnell as Snagglepuss, the failed leader. And here's what's interesting about the tax plan. You have a bunch of senators who are corporate shills and sellouts. And what happens is the Congress is fairly middle corrupt. They're not high corrupt. And so the Congress will go and actually try to work out something decent. And then the Senate goes, oh no, we can't do that. And they just basically, we're going to do our own thing. And then they go off behind closed doors and they meet with all the lobbyists. They meet with all the corporate people. And they come up with something that's good for the corporations. And they know they'll get their kickbacks. And that's what's happening. And Mitch McConnell represents that. So when the Senate comes out with its own bill, that's what it is. It's the corporate sellout bill. And that's the same thing that happened with Obamacare. They went back and they said, oh, no, you guys passed this Obamacare reform, but we got to do our own because we're all disgusting sellouts. So you have this corrupt wing of the Republican Party constantly being totally sick and twisted and corrupt. And our only hope is that piece by piece they get dismantled. And the first guy that has to go is Mitch McConnell. He just has to go. Not just resign from the leadership, but he just has to get tossed. McCain has to go. He's just a sick, twisted Democrat who's in there as a fraud. He was not a war hero. He was a disgusting imbecile who crashed his plane 3 times, who bailed out without pulling his arms in and got his arms broken. He was an idiot. He was just an idiot who sold out his company. He was a traitor. He gave secrets to the enemy, and he's just pure evil. He's twisted. He left his sick wife to marry the heiress, and He's just a disgusting individual. His nickname was Songbird in the war. So we're being run by the most sick, twisted people, and that's why nothing good is happening. And this is interesting because if they take this through into next year, when people won't get tax cuts, they're going to get crushed in the November elections, in the midterm election. They're going to get crushed. And then it will get even harder to do anything. So it's not good. It's not good. I think Trump has to come down even harder. He's been a nice guy. I think he just has to unleash holy hell. And the number one way he can unleash holy hell is to start all these indictments flying. There should be 5 special counsels. There should be 100 indictments. There should be 100 people charged. It should be, Black Friday times 100. It should just be, the end of the world with what Trump will unleash. So I think, having heard what Sessions said to Congress, it wouldn't shock me if he came back from his Asia trip and tossed Sessions immediately. But I think he won't because of the tax bill, and he's trying not to move focus away. He's trying to seem like a stable leader so they can get this tax bill through. And that's the only thing that is saving Sessions' butt. That is the only thing that's saving him. So let's take a second. I just wanted to say to everyone who enjoys patriotmouse.com, which is a network of patriots who contribute and share real news, not fake news, that they will be able to find a lot of interesting articles. Okay, some are silly and schmaltzy for entertainment purposes. I know that. But they're so ridiculous, you kind of have to show them. So I just wanted to review sort of the top stories this week and go through them. So the next article is Trump must address out-of-control debt. And this is from the upcoming book, The Trump Plan. And it just discusses how we're at the same debt level that we were in the height of World War II. It's unbelievable. And that we need specific actions to pull out of it. Some of the ideas are essentially we need to get back to tariffs. When we had tariffs, we were the most prosperous country. The idea of shifting from tariffs to direct taxation of individuals is a radical one. We are under a radical enslaving government rule now. We are victims of takeover, and we are in despair. So I'm not saying we have to move to an aggressive tariff policy, and I think actually we shouldn't even call it a tariff. We have so many new security costs, and we have to manage everything coming into the country that I think the best thing to do is to have a 10% security fee across the board. And this will bring in roughly $200 billion of revenue. On top of that, we need to have all of the rich financial people who have made a killing in this country and are some of the wealthiest people, they have to feel the pinch. And the best way to do that is to add a small fee to all trades, all financial transactions. It would be a very small fee. But because we literally have trillions of dollars in transactions every day, it also would be targeted to bring in about $200 billion a year. That's $400 billion. At the same time, we have to adopt strategies where I think the president should just say, we are going to flat reduce the budget 5% every year for 4 years, and this plus the increased revenues will bring us to parity. Now, you can't reduce entitlements, so a huge portion of this is going to fall on defense. And they don't like that because we're paying for the defense of Europe, and Europe is not. So what has Europe done with all their extra money? They've given their citizens 8-week vacations, 400 days of free paid maternity leave. They have free education to PhD level for everybody. A huge infrastructure spending on beautiful trains and high-speed rail that we don't have. And yet we're paying for them. We're paying for their defense. And then the last thing they've done is they've imported millions and millions of Africans to come in and breed and have tons of babies and set up Sharia no-go zones and rape all their women. And They can afford to give them all welfare because we pay for their defense. Maybe if we didn't pay for their defense, they wouldn't have the money to bring in 100 million Africans and pay for them all to be on welfare so they can rape women all day long. How's that for an idea? All right. The next article is that GQ announced that Colin Kaepernick is Citizen of the Year. Now, to me, all right, this isn't politically correct, but to me, Kaepernick looks like a Puerto Rican. They say he's half black. He seems like a white guy who's gotten an afro, at a beauty salon. He seems like someone who's trying very hard to be black. And you see this syndrome in a lot of mixed race people. His mom said his dad disappeared and his dad was a black man, but we don't know. I mean, I haven't seen a picture of his dad. I don't think anyone has. And so he has this wannabe black syndrome, which is bizarre, but it happens. Even if you're 90% white looking, you get this wannabe black syndrome. Why? Because of all the goodies you get if you're black and all the affirmative action and the, making it as a second string quarterback because you're one of the few black, quote unquote, black ones and getting free college education and easy entry into corporate jobs, and it just goes on and on and on. So I think all of that is horrific. It goes against Martin Luther King's vision of a colorblind society, and it all needs to be stopped. But now we come back to Kaepernick. So the fact that GQ is announcing Kaepernick, who has now been basically, the NFL is like, thanks, but no thanks. He quit his $20 million a year job and claimed he was socially oppressed, which is ridiculous. We spend $1 trillion to build these stadiums for billionaire sports team owners. It's ridiculous. All of this government welfare to sporting events has to stop. It just has to flat stop. We are a broke nation. And all that happens is they take that $1 trillion that they would have spent on those stadiums and they give it in part to the athletes who then get $20 million a year salaries while our engineers are starving in the streets because they've been replaced by people with fake degrees from India. Thank you very much. So then to see the horrible face of Kaepernick on GQ, I'm sorry, he's an ugly man. He just is ugly. And GQ is supposed to be the scion of high class and all of that, and he's wearing was it a leather jacket? Ugh, I can't tell. It's just ugly. He's wearing ugly clothes even. Now, even let's not care about his face. He's dressed like a bum. So it's just a sign. It's just a sign of social justice warrior clapping and cheering and madness, and it has to stop. It's just people have stopped watching TV. People have stopped going to NFL games. We're all sick of it. We're all sick of it. Okay, let's go on. There's a few black crime cases that I had to cover. And here's the thing about the black race. We're not allowed to talk about race, but let's talk about race. There's a lot of good in the black race. The black race is not some pure evil force. I can tell you here in Texas, blacks are incredibly polite and sweet people. But what's happened is there are these dense pockets of welfare slums where people don't work, their children don't work, there's no fathers around, everybody goes amok, and they become like feral dogs. They're just savage, brain-mangled animals. And this is where the horrific crimes come from. And until we have welfare reform and we stop our dysgenic policies, which reward people with more money for having more kids on welfare and punish our smartest people with overwork and high taxes so that they can't even have children, until we stop those dysgenic policies, we're going to have horrific crimes by blacks against whites, which are an epidemic in this country and everywhere else where there's pockets of blacks on welfare. And that's exactly what's happening in Europe as well. They don't have their imported African wonderkins having to work for a living, so all they do is commit crimes and rape. So here's the first story. It's just so horrible. These are hard for me even to read. blacks forced 15-year-old girl to have oral sex with 11 men until her throat bled out. They were let off with $5,000 bond. Apparently there was a bucket so that the men had a place to pee in, and then they'd go back to throat raping this 15-year-old girl. I don't have words. I'm just going to leave it at that. Read the article. Next. Mall of America stabbing, sign of times for failing city. And I guess the Mall of America is in Minneapolis, if I recall. I've been there. It was a beautiful mall, but the problem is so many cities in the central Midwest and Northeast have fallen. It's goes straight up, St. Louis, you've got Baltimore, you've got Chicago, and then Minneapolis, Detroit, Michigan, Buffalo, Rochester's fallen. It's now more than 50% black, which is incredible because that was the upstate tech city of New York. So this, if you look at the picture of what this guy looks like, he looks like a monster. He just looks like a savage. There's just no words for it. Doesn't look human like you and I look human. He looks like a savage animal. And completely, dead, glazed over shark eyes, which is so common. And these are people that have just gone through, drooled through school, had lots of sex and rape and drugs, and it just shows. It shows. By the time they get to 16, 17, they're just burned out non-human entities. So the fact that this guy, the story is this guy was basically, stuffing clothes or stuff under his shirt. Some people tried to stop him, and he pulls out a knife and stabbed two of them. This is kind of shocking for, if you can think of Minneapolis, which used to be kind of a Swedish expat enclave and this traditional cow farming society. And it's fallen. It's fallen because our welfare programs are breeding blacks and taxing Europanic Americans. I don't like to say white because I'm not white. I'm Europanic. My skin isn't white. It's pink and orange and yellow. It isn't white. So Europanic Americans are being taxed to death to pay for, and we don't even have enough taxes, we're going into debt, to pay for these welfare programs to grow worthless, degenerate Americans. And all of it is a mess. All of it needs to be changed. So our middle class is dying, and we're getting mall stabbings by Fuzzy Head. It's all ridiculous. All right. Next story. Mattel releases ISIS hijaba Barbie. This is not a joke. Paul Joseph Watson has a really good tirade on this. I won't scream endlessly like Paul did on this one. I could never match his vitriol tone. This is horrific. The hijab is a sign of the enslavement of women, and the Barbie doll was released as a sign of the empowerment of women. So by Mattel releasing this, they have now gone utterly against everything they stand for out of complete ignorance and social justice warrior insanity. Now, they say it's to celebrate this black Muslim woman fencer who got a bronze, I think, in the Olympics while wearing a hijab. So they're going to have special Olympic categories for people performing all the sports while wearing full body burqas, and so they can give them medals as well. It's all insane. It's all psychosis. So the hell with you, Mattel. I'll burn all my Barbies, and you're a disgusting company, and you're imbeciles. You're a bunch of just complete morons, and you're ruining the lives of women by promoting Arab slave culture. So go to hell. All right, next article. The Trump Plan. A plan for Trump. How does fighting dysgenics work in practical sense? So this article is another chapter from the upcoming book, The Trump Plan. And it talks in great detail about how the Margaret Sanger eugenics movement, which was quite popular in the early parts of the 20th century, was only made unpopular by arguments against Hitler for promoting eugenics, which I don't think he quite did. I think he was throwing out invaders, Jewish invaders, who weren't Germans. In the days before passports, people just flowed into countries, and he wanted them out. He wanted Germany for German people. And this notion of a unified society is not eugenics. He did talk about the Aryan race, but he did not promote eugenic policies. He did not go around sterilizing everybody who wasn't blonde, for example. So this article talks about, all right, well, what do we do? Our society's dying because we're basically growing populations of people that are degenerate, that are, criminals, rapists, stupid, non-productive, welfare parasites. They're growing in number. And the people that can actually move our society forward are falling apart, not having children, overworked, forced into huge, demanding university programs for 8 years. There's no way to have families in that system. So it talks about several alternative approaches, which are fighting dysgenics, not pro-eugenics. There's a difference. We can probably bring society back far enough to center if we simply fight dysgenics without getting into pro-eugenics. In other words, we don't have to specifically state what is optimum, what are we selecting for. We simply have to state what we want to discourage. So if you cannot support yourself, you shouldn't be having children. You shouldn't be getting rewarded for having children. You certainly shouldn't be getting rewarded for having children out of wedlock. There's a lot of other things in the article. I encourage you to go read it. Read it, patriotmouse.com. That's PATRIOTMOUSE. All right, next article. Cruel Asian tug-of-war game threatens to tear Trump's arms off. And there's a ridiculous picture of Trump with his arms over each other with all the other dopey world leaders, and they're all pulling their arms. It's ridiculous. Why or how they put Trump in these ridiculous photo ops, I don't know. I don't know why he does them. He looks stupid. He should refuse to do them. First it started with the Saudi sword dance, which, okay, it involves swords, so that was kind of macho. I can live with that a little bit. But then we go into this Trump tug-of-war thing, and you just have to start to say, no. The other ridiculous photo op was when, the Saudis insisted on giving Trump a medal, knowing that the guy is 6'4", and that the Saudi prince is 5'1" or something, and Trump would have to bend way down to get that medal. And then they take the picture, and what does it look like? Oh, it looks like Trump is bowing. He's bowing to the Saudis. Trump should have said, okay, well, you need to build a platform that's about 4 feet high with steps. You can walk up the platform and you can put the medal around my neck so I don't have to bend over, because I'm not bending over. And that's a lot of what is going on with these stupid photo ops. They're all just little digs at Trump, little jabs to humiliate him, and he shouldn't stand for it. Anyways, it's just ridiculous, but it is a very silly picture, so it's posted under humor and satire. All right. The next article is sad. It's another black crime article. We don't just cover black crime, but we focus on black crime because it's a statement of how far America's fallen. And it's another grandmother burned to death. Now, I don't know about you, but when I grew up, we didn't lock our doors. We didn't bother with worrying about. Well, first of all, we were dirt poor. Yes, I grew up dirt poor and put myself through. I grew up dirt poor. I was thrown in the streets, At 16, I put myself through Ivy League institutions, and I came out and worked to become fairly successful. That's the Europanic work effort. This is the Negroid welfare work effort, which is go around and set old grandmothers on fire and steal their stuff. I don't want to live in a society that's like this. And the one bit of good news is he was given the death penalty. And the children are going to watch. And they actually spoke and said, "Oh, you are a very bad man." I would have said, "I hope you burn in hell and suffer forever and nothing will be enough torture for you, you mad, sick dog." But they were very restrained. And I think it's important that we all recognize that this is happening to our society because of the civil rights movements of the 1960s, when LBJ, who murdered Kennedy, by the way, when LBJ set off this ridiculous handout welfare payola to the black people, which only made things worse and worse and worse. Before that, their blacks had stable families. We had the Fillmore district in San Francisco where they had shops and they would sell fancy hats and walking canes to pimp out, and not that they were pimps, but to get that pimped out black look, that high society, suits. And at night they'd open and run jazz clubs, and a lot of the whites would come and bring their money, and things were working. They had separate schools, they were in their own schools, and they were getting basic educations, and the whites were getting higher levels of education without interruption and madness and beatdowns and gangs and thugs. So it's hard because we all listen to Jefferson, and I want to talk about Jefferson for a second. A lot of where we're screwed up in this country is because of the Declaration of Independence. And Jefferson stealing his ideas from Thomas Paine, yes, that's correct, writes, "All men are created equal." Now, when you listen to "all men are created equal," you should put in parentheses at the end of it, "as men, not kings," because that is what Jefferson meant. All men are created equal as men, not kings and men. This is the equality Jefferson was talking about, that there is not a king class of men. He was not saying that blacks and whites were equal. He was not saying that everybody gets the same house, which is the communist ideal. He was saying that there are not kings and men. There are just men. So this "all men are created equal" has somehow been perverted to everybody deserves equality of outcome. So even if you're dumb and lazy, you still get a big house, you still get lots of food, you still get to have lots of kids paid for. And this is the LBJ mistake. And this is really not what Martin Luther King was looking for, who, by the way, evidence points to Jesse Jackson was the person who assassinated him. There's an article on that on Patriot Mouse. If you search for Jesse Jackson, you'll find it. The night of the assassination, Jesse Jackson wore a tie, and he never wore a tie. Never. And Martin Luther King says, "Hey, Jesse, what you doing wearing that tie? You looking like an idiot. Take the tie off." And Jesse's like, no, I'm wearing my tie. I'm wearing my tie. And he's like, "Take the tie off." He's like, "But I'm wearing my tie." And so they go out on the balcony, and Martin Luther King's not wearing a tie, and Jesse's wearing a tie. And then the sniper blows Martin Luther King's head off. Now, a lot of people say that tie was the signal, "Don't shoot me, I'm your informant." And a lot of people think that it was probably a mafia-hired. FBI hires the mafia a lot, or the CIA hires the mafia a lot to pull the hit. Anyways, because of that, LBJ had this huge outpouring of grief towards blacks, which is what they knew would happen. And then it begins this welfare society. And it's all been a disaster ever since. And one of the key things that has to change is you cannot have, I'm not going to say black, but let's just say teen girls in high school as a economic strategy trying to have 3 children by the time they're 18 so they get into free Section 8 housing and get free money for the rest of their life. That is an insane policy to promote. And instead we should have a policy where if you've never worked and you've never paid, or you've paid very little into the tax system, what you get back from welfare or disability should be very small and modest indeed. But if you've worked your butt off for 20 years, and let's say you get in a factory accident or something and you can't work, fine, you should get a good amount. And if you've worked 30 years and paid in a ton, you should get the maximum amount. And it should not be at all based on having children. Another problem is Section 8 housing should be abolished. You should not have people who are dysgenic getting the same quality housing as those who are working hard. And also Section 8 housing is used to move dysgenic people into the people that have fled the dysgenic neighborhoods and destroy the new communities so that there's basically nowhere left to run, and then you have to leave the whole state, and then California collapses, and then there's very little left to run. Now it's down to like Texas. There's not much left. In fact, Houston is already 70% non-Europanic. What's left? There's nothing left. America's done. It's finished. We basically have to aggressively reverse course today, or by 2050 it's over. It's done. Our nation ceases to exist as we know it. It will be a third world country. It'll be utterly destitute. It'll be like Brazil with a 1% uber rich and a 99%, favelas and people living in shanty towns and on the streets or pooping in the street like in San Francisco, which is one reason I left. Yeah. Other stories, there's a plague outbreak from Madagascar moving across Africa because they all, I won't say the F word, they all have sex with their dead people and with apes and eat dead bats, and they eat dead apes and bushmeat, and they have open sewage and lots of rats. And so just like in the Middle Ages when the rats were running everywhere and the cities weren't clean, they had the plague. Well, same thing. Africa is just as unclean, and they have the plague. So that's not surprising. And there's also a very popular article about Indian trains blocked by the poop from all the pooping on the train tracks. And I encourage you to look that one up. It's quite popular. People seem to enjoy that. How just all the beaches are covered in poop in Africa and India. And they have toilets. They just don't like using them. So go figure. Also, Hispanics are now the majority in California. Will whites get minority handouts? Well, of course whites won't get any kind of affirmative action or handouts or priority in university. No, whites get nothing. If you're Europanic, sorry, I shouldn't say whites. If you're Europanic American, and your state is now utterly destroyed and taken over, which is only possible if you have very high profitable industries in your state, and California has the tech industry and Hollywood, so they're able to barely survive by only plunging $15 billion in debt and having unfunded pensions with their majority non-Europanic population, but they're falling apart. And even with those hugely productive industries, it's not enough tax revenue to pay for the non-Europanic society they've built there. So they got a huge handout from Obama from the economic stimulus package, which just a lot of it went to California to pay off their debts from funding all these programs for non-Europanics and for funding the invaders. And California's gone to hell, and it's now a minority Europanic state. If that's not a warning, I don't know what is. McCain is furious that Trump sides with Putin and denies the Russian election hacking. Yeah, I'm not even going to talk about McCain. All I will say is look at the article because there's a very funny picture of a Japanese demon with a giant pickle nose. He's all red. That was the closest I could get to John McCain. Uh, all right. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this roundup of the news. And basically, the format is going to be either doing news roundups or to take a particular topic and go into depth. One of the topics we'll probably be hitting very soon is going to be the H-1B visa, which is an utter horror that Trump has lied and done absolute shit all about, and is a complete genocide. So that's a big thing that's going to take a full talk to go through the horror of it all. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. Leave comments. Be sure to like, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and also please check out patriotmouse.com. You can get exclusive Patriot Mouse mug, and that helps support us, and also become a Patreon supporting member. Very much would appreciate it. Thank you. I hope you had a great week. And while some of these articles are painful, I hope you did enjoy the weekly roundup on PNN, the Patriot News Network. Thank you.